I'm going to make the case on the value that UBA brings into the security picture, and it is because it's an integral, optional integral part of QRadar. And to illustrate that, let me switch from the offenses new view into the actual use case manager app. And as you see, there's a transition in the look and feel. Not all the apps at the moment that this recording is being made has transitioned to the new UI. So you will see me showing this and other in the traditional one. So if we look, for example, something that people are all the time worry about when they think of UVA is exfiltration of data. If we look for, just put like that, let me see all the rules that has exfiltration in it. We see a couple of them, right? And notice that there are some that are UBA specific and other ones that are not. And any one of them, of course, you can click on it, you can enable, disable it, and from here, and you can click on it and see the logic of it. And if you want to actually change it and modify it, you can just go into the traditional editor, and if you know English, even with a heavy accent like mine, you can do wonders with these rules and modify them in ways that you like. But that's besides the point of UVA, other than saying it is very, very flexible. Let's look for other type of things that people think of when working with UVA. Let's put the word abnormal. Let's say just for that. Let me actually take this out and click here for abnormal. If we do that, we see that again there's a bunch of abnormalities, some specific for UVA, and more on that later, and other ones for traditional things in QRadar. And you'll see them in this video working hand in hand. Another thing that makes UVA useful is, when we talk about data going out, I mean, people worry, rightly so, for example, large outbound or transfer onto the cloud, or things are going out in a slow rate, all this type of logic. How is it that QRadar can detect whether something is large or small? And that all has to do with the fact that QRadar has the capability of processing flows. If we go in here on the network activity, we see this is actually my network here at home, and we see that destination byte and source byte and the type of application, all these wonderful data that tells you whether something big compressed or encrypted or not, whether a lot of data is going to a particular region on a specific port, on a specific application. It gets to know that information by virtue of being integrated with QRadar. Most rules in QRadar are meant to fire offenses. For example, if we take a look at this one, this is an offense. These are the time of the event. We can actually see all those events in here, but let's actually analyze this particular offense, because we're going to see it from the perspective of QRadar as well as from the perspective specifically from UBA. And to do that, I'm gonna, since the UBA app is not in the new UI, for fairness, I'm gonna go and revert to the traditional view of QRadar, and I'm gonna go to the standard offenses view. And here's the same, definitely much better looking in the new UI, but nevertheless, one of the pieces that helps QRadar's investigation and speeds up QRadar investigation is this advisor component. And this is first of all answering me the question, is this false positive or not? Well, advisor is telling you that it's a high priority, so most likely it is not a false positive. And if we look at it from the graphics perspective, let's actually take some pieces of information out because there's a lot in here. We see that there's this guy Ronnie Shire, and we are going to be going back to Ronnie from the UBA perspective in a while, but we see that he hit some hashes in here that are malicious. Everything in red is malicious in advisor, and you can click in it and see the details of it, but this is not to focus on advisor only, but this is the data that was in that offense that we saw. Okay, good. But now when we bring what I like to call the Facebook of the malware, these are the pieces of malware. If you want to answer the question, okay, are we a target of choice? If we are a target of choice instead of a target of opportunity, who's behind? Which organization is behind this? And we can actually answer that question if we look at the IOCs that are directly or indirectly related to this particular data. And we see that this particular IP is related with this particular organization, the Twisted Spider, and you can click in it and see the details, and we see other pieces of malware that are related, that has toxicity and relevance big enough to advise or tell me these things are parents, they are related. So if you want to see who's behind it, here are all the IOCs for it, and I can actually go ahead and export them and put it into reference sets in QRadar, so QRadar will be firing new offenses if anyone touches any one of these blue IOCs that were not part of my offense. But then the story gets more interesting when we bring the green. And this is performing a search 7 days back into my system and see if anyone has already touched any one of those IOCs. And we see that this guy, Joe Every, and this guy, Desert Falcon, and here's Ronnie, all these people had been in contact with these particular IOCs. Maybe it is worthwhile to investigate what Ronnie was doing in more detail from a UBA perspective. But before doing that, let me actually go back to the use case manager and explain the difference between UVA rules and standard rules. As you saw, standard rules fire offenses, as we just saw. UVA rules are not meant to fire offenses. Let's click into anyone. I'm clicking this one in particular. If we actually look at it in the standard rules wizard, unlike the previous one that has this thing checked in, says make part of an offense, this one is not. This one has these parameters, sense value equals 5, which means that in the philosophy of UBA, I'm going to be adding 5 points of risk to whoever user makes this rule to trigger. And the idea is that in UBA, you will be accumulating risk. Here's a look at the UBA more on that. I'm going to come back to here later. But you see that it's monitoring the risk of every user. And when the risk surpasses a particular threshold, it's marked in red here, as Ronnie has. But also, if we go back to the offenses, we'll see that for those two red things, yes, we have two offenses that has crossed a threshold that has been set, and I'll show more on that later. Well, actually, we can show it right now. Let me go back to the UBA. If we click in this gear, we see that there is a threshold. And you set it up. For example, if I see that I want an offense to fire every time that the threshold surpasses the 3000 value, and I hit enter, notice that it's telling me, oh, 2 of them will fire. And we saw those two, that Jay Black and Ronnie Shire. So, and you can tune up, once you have the application running for a while and you see the normal level of risk, you set this, and that can be static or dynamic if you have seasonal behavior that makes it change. And the decay factor, I like to call it the rate of forgiveness. So how quickly the risk diminishes over time. So when you did something bad, you're not going to be flagged as bad all the time, but that you get some forgiveness with time. So that's how you set up. But then when you do, and you get one of those offenses, you are invited to investigate that user. All that to say that if you have any rule, let's say that this is a rule that I define myself, and I want to make it be contributing to a risk, all I need to do is go here, and regardless of whether it fires an offense or not, here in the event description, I need to put that sense value equal whatever is 25 or whatever is the parameter. And by doing so, when this rule fires, it will add risk to the specific user involved in here. So that's the difference between the rules that are pure UBA and the ones that are not. But you see that they can work very nice together. There is a place where you can see the rules in UBA better. If we click in this particular button, Here we can see that in my system we have almost 200 pure UVA rules. And for example, if we click here on the ones that we were looking at before, exfiltration ones, and if you want to see what are the log sources that makes this intelligence possible, all you need to do is click into, let's say this data exfiltration by removable media, for example. And you go here and you get the documentation of it, but most importantly, you see the log sources that can contribute for the detection of that. And we have vertices and semantic endpoint protection. So, and every rule will tell you what are the log sources that help it detect that. So in my system, the user had been imported from a directory. It can be Active Directory. It can be, in fact, if you click in here, you'll see the options that you have. You can bring it from LDAP or Active Directory, from a reference table, from a CSV file, well, from whatever you actually want. Remember that offense that Ronnie Shire fired? Let's actually, if we want to see into more detail on Ronnie, of course we have in here, but if even regardless of whether he is or not, because here are the monitor user with the highest offenses, but you can look for Ronnie, because we have the Active Directory integration. You can look for its name, first name, last name, whatever it is, and here's the data from that Active Directory. And let's forget about this. This is machine learning. We're going to see it later, but we can see a timeline of the things, risky things, and the normal things that Ronnie has actually done. So I haven't had the system running for too long, but we can actually see in here, and you can go back in time and see, well, let's say that from the 28th until the 30th, what is it that the things, and this is performing a search in QRadar. All the data, you don't need to move data around from different systems. All the stuff is actually here, and we can actually see the timeline. You see that the risks actually increase, and we can see the different days, and we can see, for example, on June 29, what was actually Ronnie doing, and we can see the details of all the use cases that were actually detected. And we can click at any one of those. But let's say that I haven't seen Advisor from before on Ronnie. I'm just investigating Ronnie for the first time, and I'm going to click in here and see, what do you know about Ronnie? And I can go here, and I can actually even see it graphically, and it tells me several things. Well, these are the sites that Ronnie has actually been going from the proxy logs. UBA monitors those and assign risk on the different things that he goes in, gamer, anonymizer sites, and all that stuff. But it's also telling me, hey, Ronnie has some stuff here on this offense 385. And if we click in here, we go to the familiar place I showed you before, and you see the connections of both. This is a big time saver compared to having some information in one system, some information in another. You have everything integrated into the same tool. If you want to see it from the kill chain or the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's more modern is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm here back into the Use Case Manager app, and if I click here on the MITRE graph, it's making a search, and it's telling me, hey, based on the tactics and technique of MITRE, these are the rules that you have from UBA and from standard QRadar. The darker the color, the more things that you actually have defined in there. Or actually can actually go back and say, well, tell me for the last 24 hours, what are the rules that are fired in my system, seen from the perspective of the MITRE ATT&CK framework? If I click into the eye, I see all these offenses I've actually fired in the last 24 hours in my system. And again, the darker the color, the more things that are actually being detected in it, right? So UVA doesn't do everything out of the box. Sometimes it needs a little bit of help. So for example, if we are trying to see for somebody who installs suspicious app, we look here for suspicious, we find it's here at the bottom. this installing suspicious app? Well, you need to tell me what are in a reference set. I'm going to click here. This is your sample data. In a reference set, you need to give me the name of the apps that are allowed, so I know what is not actually allowed. Right? So you have whitelist, blacklist. You have both combinations, and that's the way. Same thing with geography. When you look into geography, places that you should not be doing business with, well, you actually need to. Let me actually clear this and put here geography. You need to tell me what are the countries that you have are allowed and which are the ones that are restricted. For example, here are the list of the, by default, the countries that you should not be doing business with. And by that, you help UBA know better. Executive users, you want to protect them particularly against phishing attack. Well, you need to tell me who your execs are. All right? So that's the way you perform that. While I'm here, let me show you, I mean, the value of QRadar is not just on log on flows, but the inspection of the full payload that you get with QNI allows you to do things like, for example, detecting a file hash seen across multiple hosts. You know, maybe it's the same program, maybe some people colluding here. What is it that is actually going on? You don't get these details unless you inspect the entire payload. And UBA has its own specific rules that work in combination with that. Because you define your network hierarchy in QRadar, QRadar know what's local to local, local to remote, remote to local, and all these beautiful rules. So for example, if somebody's from the inside scanning your database, or looking for databases in there, well, this rule is certainly gonna add a lot of points, 15 points of risk, and you can actually modify this to your pleasure, right? To whatever you, not to your pleasure, to whatever you consider to be appropriate. And I can spend hours in here. There are, you know, things that are specific to domain controller type of attacks. Things on cloud. I mean, most of the data filtration these days, so the guys try to put stuff in the cloud. Well, they're going to be put in here in AWS. You're going to be able to catch it as well. Browsing behavior. Are you interested in people going to any one of these specific sites? Well, if you give me the proxy logs, we have these things already, you know, classified, and we can give additional points. Not because you go into a gambling site, you're going to fire an offense, but if you do enough gambling and enough stuff, and your risk accumulates over time, then you may surpass that threshold, and that invites you to be actually investigated. Let's see this one over here. Access and authentication. Well, for example, this one, terminate a user, is a good practice. When you terminate a user, you may want to put his ID into this particular reference set. So if for any reason somebody reactivate him, you're gonna get additional 25 points because somebody that's supposed to be terminated is still using the system. You know, and the tool is full of these things, critical access, etc. Right? You need to tell me what those critical access are, right? In UBA, there is a concept of a watch list. So you can actually say, well, I'm going to be monitoring some particular people. I'm going to change the name. Let's say that these are the acquisition team. Say that this is a group of people that are going to be evaluating, to spell that right, are going to be evaluating a company that we're going to purchase. We want to make sure that they don't do something fishy with it. We can add those people in here. You can scale up the risk factor. Say this is so important, I'm going to put, I'm going to scale this in an order of magnitude to 10, and then you specify where are the actual users. They can be in a table in a reference set in QRadar, or you can select them by a property, for example, by job title or department that they are working in, and in doing so, you're going to have a specific group of users that you're going to be watching in this particular view for a particular activity. When you want to produce a report, well, the beauty of QRadar is that it has the Pulse view, and Pulse is actually updated to the new UI. And this is an example of a particular view. Anything you can search on QRadar, all the data that it has from UBA and from standard, you can make it a nice looking report on that. And it's actually, this is the information in the last 2 hours. If I want to see that in the last 6 hours, well, this is a search. and I can just click here update, and QRadar is going to perform that specific search and update the chart with the results from the last 6 hours. So far I have been speaking of traditional UBA, but UBA has a model for machine learning, for learning what's normal and what's not normal in your environment. So once you have your system running for a while, as I have in mind, that these models have loaded and I know how everybody behave, then you have the advantage of enabling, and this is optional of course, some models that look at different type of things. So for example, I actually meant to click here on machine learning, not on the rules. And we are going to be presented with the models that by default comes in the tool. For example, access activity. Well, how much of access do you do into the things that you are allowed to? I mean, and everybody introduces risk into the company. When your risk increases, then is when it can become problematic, and this you can enable those models. Activity distribution. What are the things that you typically do? I do this in this system, that on that system, and the system learns from you. And same thing with aggregated activity. You know, on the total activity that I do, how much of it do I do? Authentication, data upload, and the point on any one of these things is, okay, when I deviate, let's say, from authentication activity, if I begin to do a lot of authentication, all of a sudden, then I'm going to be given an additional risk point because I'm deviating from my normal self. And these things are particularly very useful to detect credential stealing. When your credentials are stolen, then it is you apparently the one doing the thing. So why should anybody care? Well, because you, instead of touching 50 records that you touch every day, all of a sudden you are touching, 500 records or 5,000 records. So the amount of risk is going to be so that your overall risk score is going to go up, because that's not the way you normally behave. Same thing with uploading data to remote network, downloading data. I'm going to go back into this into a minute. So when your risk posture changes, when you are involved into suspicious activity, these peer group and learn group are actually very interesting. Define peer groups is, okay, this is the way that all the people that are in the same group in Active Directory behave. Why are you different? Well, it might be that even though I'm in that group, I'm not that type of guy, and then if the first time that this fires might be a false positive, you say, well, but this guy, we know, and the system will learn that, okay, that's the way he behaved, that's fine. But there are also learn peer groups. Let's say that this is, for example, let's say that assistants or secretaries begin to behave like managers. Well, when that begins to happen, again, it may call your attention, but it could be that the assistant is actually the one that approved the things that the manager tells her to do so, and he delegated those things into her. I mean, as you can see, this is a very clever way of really learning how everybody behaves, and deviation from the normal self is what brings this risk to increase and call to your attention. And you can create your own model, and you can take some of the templates that we provide out of the box here for you to take it as the base, and or you can combine it with searches in QRadar. You have the AQL search that is looking for the particular information. You may want to get some help from some business partner of an IBMer to help you set this up. This is the only part that is not intuitive to do, because again, these are the machine learning models, but everything that is outside of the box is ready for you to use. And I encourage you to start by normal UBA, moving into machine learning, and then you can be tuning your own system to find those needles in the haystack. And I hope that this gives you my perspective on why I think that a UBA system should be fully integrated with a very capable SIEM tool in order for you to find the things that you are not looking for. Because to find what you're looking for, any tool will do. What you want to find is the things that are abnormal, and you want the system to tell you that. And then you can go on and do and progress the actual investigation.